You're listening to Designing the Revolution. This is Chapter 18, Part 1, A22. The revolution has to be international. Sounds like a reasonable idea. People have been discussing this for a long time. There's no point having major regime change, cultural change in one country. It has to happen in lots of countries, and preferably it has to happen in lots of countries all at the same time in close sequence. So the good news is that this talk and the next one is looking at civil resistance organisations in several different European and Western countries. And they're all part of this network A22. It's called A22 because it's set up in April 2022. So all these projects broadly follow the methodologies that have been set up, been described in previous episodes. So what I'm going to do is give a bit more of a grounded view of how these projects have got going, how they relate to each other, how the A22 network has created an international organisation, and it gives a sort of template of how to replicate these highly successful organisational forms and also at the same time federate them so you get some international strategic coherence, as you might say. And the top level point here, of course, is that these organisations have this confrontation, this action paradigm. They're not networks for debate. They're not organisations for lobbying. They're here to create civil resistance against the climate criminality. And they're facing, of course, varying degrees of repression. Okay, so we've talked about this quite a lot in previous talks, but let's just remind ourselves that over the last 30, 40 years, in terms of pragmatic empirical research on the major themes of the left project, i.e. equality and liberty, there's been a healthy moving away from the old conflict between, top down and bottom up, hierarchy and horizontal. And the actual frontline research is quite exciting because what it's saying is there is in fact no conflict, in the sense that without a strong centre you can't have effective decentralisation, and you can't have a strong centre without effective decentralisation. And you might want to check out some of the literature on Porto Alegre, on Kerala. There's a number of what you might call post-dogmatic Marxist sort of left experiments over the last 2 or 3 decades. And really that research has formed the grounding, as it were, for these A22 projects. And they've been centred in these 2 major propositions. The first proposition is, if you're going to get anywhere, you need a functional hierarchy. The words functional hierarchy are problematic. The word hierarchy triggers all sorts of reactions in some people. But the point is this open arrangement where there's some people making the key decisions, they delegate authority, they give autonomy, they take feedback. The people at the top, in the top group, rotate. It's humanised, got service orientation. So there's all sorts of sophisticated elements which we've been talking about that make it work well. But it avoids the extreme of this old, Leninist, do as I say, otherwise you're going to get shot sort of rubbish. And at the same time, it avoids the other extreme of this amorphous horizontalist mush where everyone's involved in everything and nothing therefore happens, and related themes. And then there's this second discovery, as you might say, of the design of the social space, which I've been more involved with my own research, and we've talked about it lots of times, so I'm not going to go through it again, but this whole notion that the social space creates sociability and what have you. So the A22 projects have come out of this, this intellectual sort of process. And more concretely, they've come out of the empirical developments in Extinction Rebellion, leading through to Insulate Britain in the UK and Just Stop Oil, and this systematisation that I've been primarily involved with for 24 months now. And what we've done is, and I'll describe this in more details in a minute, is use a template and then basically go and sell it around the Western world. Go to groups and say, hey guys, you should try this because it works, and replicate it. So, that gives this grounding. A22 didn't, appear one day. It's from this intellectual tradition, and it's from this sort of pragmatic, actual real world frontline design, confrontational situation we've had growing since 2019 in the Western world. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to describe how this A22 situation works. I'm going to just tell you briefly about 4 key elements, 4 non-negotiable elements that exist in order to set up an A22 project in a Western world country. Then I'm going to talk about the Dynamo mechanism, which we've already covered, but I'll show how that works in an A22 project process. And then I'm going to talk about culture, which is often left off the agenda, as it were, but it's absolutely critical because culture trumps strategy, as they say, and how that culture is embedded in an A22 context. And then finally, at the end of this part of it, I'm going to talk in some detail about this critical moment, this critical few weeks, month or two of setting up a project, and how you just bring it from 0 through to sort of 30, 40 people, which, as I'll argue, is the critical design challenge of creating civil resistance in Western societies at this present moment in time. Okay, so let's trundle through it, shall we? So the 4 elements, these will be fairly familiar to you, of course, but the thing to take on board here is the non-negotiableness of this, right? This is not like the original Extinction Rebellion philosophy, which was, someone in Spain wants to set up an XR group, you send them a few bits of paper, you have a session with them, and then you go, good luck, and hope for the best. This is a lot more. This is what you do. If you don't want to do it, that's cool. You can go and do something else, right? No one's forcing anyone. If you want to do an A22 project, number 1, you need 6 to 8 people in a central group. Those people are the executive. They control the project. They're responsible for the project. They need to have a culture of service and openness and competency and humility, and they're in control. And everyone knows they're in control. There's no fuzziness. There's no structuralist nonsense. It's like, this is it. You've got the job, okay? Probably, in a way, the most critical element. Number 2, there is a demand of the government. It's concrete. It's Martin Luther King move through the campaigns philosophy of change, which we talked about in the last episode. We want this, and it's achievable. It's popular. It's it's incremental in a sense, and it's doable. You could win this if you got enough people on the street. In other words, we're not going for the motions here. This is not performative protest. This is not turn up on a Saturday to express your discontent with the government. This is, we are wanting you to change, and moving beyond protest into civil resistance, We will force you. We will force you to change through civil resistance, because what you are doing is unconstitutional, illegal, immoral, obscene, etc. Number 3, civil disobedience. This is not an old bureaucratic left, Grumpsky-esque, let's move through the institutions routine. We're not lobbying. We're not sitting around discussing. We're not moving through the committees. We are out in the street creating disruption, getting on the front pages of the papers, getting in the news. And we're doing civil disobedience day after day after day. This is not go down to London and do it for one day. This is ongoing, like Insulate Britain, 7 weeks, 3 times a week in the motorways. Bang, 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 bang. It's attrition. It's ongoing. It gains massive public attention, 90% name recognition. Massive, right? Number 4, mobilisation. Systematic recruitment of ordinary people beyond the activist bubble, beyond the capital city, beyond the urban middle class, beyond the sort of young person silo, beyond the sort of older person retired teacher silo, right? This is about going and speaking to human beings, going to speaking to citizens and saying, this is a universal affront to all our values. This is a violation of everything we believe in. This is something that you have no choice but to engage in. And the mechanism of that is through these local meetings, these offline meetings, online meetings, hundreds of them, 1,000 meetings in 4 months, like was done in Germany last year. It's a lot of work, and it works. Okay, so those are the 4 elements, and you'll be familiar with them if you've seen the previous episodes. And they're non-negotiable. It's not like a group can come to A22 and say, well, we like 3 of them, but we don't fancy doing mobilisation. It's like, that's cool. That's not A22. All right. So second thing is the expansion dynamo. Again, we've gone through this, but I'm going to, go through it a little bit more in terms of, first of all, this is an iteration. It's not like we go to a group in a European country and go, you do this, this and this, and then you go and do A, and suddenly you're going to win. It's like you do this, this and this, you get 20 people, and you go out and you sit in the road, or you blockade something, or you go and throw soup over something. And then you mobilise again. And then you get 50 people, and then you mobilise again, and you get 200 people, and then you mobilise again, and you get 1,000 people. That's this continual iteration and interaction and fusion between mobilisation, meetings, publicising, increasingly online promotion and such like, and then this funnel, people coming through and then getting involved. So there's 2 elements to this dynamo, right? First of all, there's the money element. Money is energy. Money drives social activity. If you haven't got money, then you've got an intrinsic limits. Okay, you either have, a few people working really hard over a long period, or you have lots and lots of people doing something for 2 or 3 weeks, and then it runs out of steam. If you want 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people in an organisational setting, doing things month after month for 18 months, people are going to be paid. If you don't pay them, then you're just going to get middle class, older people who can afford to work full time. You're going to get these informal hierarchies. You're going to exclude, younger people, people of colour. It's no good. No one's pretending money isn't problematic for all the good reasons we know. But so the whole notion here is to monetize this iterative process. So when people are put into prison, there's adverts on social media. When you're in the meetings, you're asking for donations at the end of the meeting. This is a traditional trade union, social movement orientation. Like, we fund ourselves. Obviously, some money, and a lot of money did come from cultural figures who were very generous in order to get the A22 situation on the go. So there's no question about that. But the reason they gave money, let me emphasize this, the reason they gave money is because it was organized, okay? Because it had a track record, because it was credible, because it had stats, right? It wasn't, hey, we're cool activists and we're going to do stuff on the climate. It was like, here's 2 pages and why it works. You put this money in and you get this many people recruited. It's like a plan. So you've got this money coming in, and the money basically then is used to fund the full-time organisers, who then go and organise meetings, and they organise more meetings, and these extra meetings creates more credibility, more money, which feeds into more meetings. So you have this dynamo, iterative process between money and meetings and full-time people, and then this other iterative positive feedback loop between doing actions and mobilisation and actions. So all these things is this ongoing circular process. It's not do this and then do this, right? That's mechanical thinking. This is an ecological living system of interactive elements. So the meetings, of course, cover a multitude of sins, of course. So you have the classical meeting, which is, Victorian mobilising, 19th century mobilising, go to Village X, hand out 5,000 leaflets. You get this collective mix of people, grandmothers, small shopkeepers coming. Most people can't really cope, but you get a small number of people, and this provides demographical pluralism, right? Demographic variety. It's not all young people, it's not all professional people. And I think I may have mentioned this, but, in my view, this is what made Extinction Rebellion in 2019 fundamentally different to many of the Western society Extinction Rebellion formations that set up in the following year in 2020. What happened was the XR brand was inadvertently, or not so inadvertently, captured by professional, middle-class, urban people in Western countries, which is fine. No one's got a problem with that. But then they sat on the brand. They didn't systematically go out and mobilise. While in the UK, we had a good 500 meetings, even before April 2019, where we were going to every region of the country, every council, every town, and we had these 200 groups. So you had immediately what you might call a national spread of demographics, and it gave it a completely different character to some of the European countries where this didn't happen. Then, just to return to all the meetings, you've got the celebrity meetings, cultural figures, they do a Zoom for you and bring people in, and then you've got sectional meetings, i.e. meetings with trade unions, meetings with the church, meetings with young people, meetings with people of colour, where you're setting up a group who belong to that social group, and they promote the civil resistance organisation within that group. And maybe they set up a sub-organisation, like at the moment it's the Student Resistance Network, I think it's going to be called. So it has an identity, but it has an identity within Just Stop Oil, within this broader coalition framework. So again, you get the best of both worlds. You get the strategic discipline of everyone working together, and you get the identity pluralism of people, wanting to mix with people who are similar in various demographical ways. Okay, so that's the expansion mechanism. Then the last thing is creating the culture. So creating the culture, as we've talked about, is creating leadership, like ethical, charismatic, positive, humorous, self-depreciating leadership. I'm nothing special, but I've come to talk to you today, all that sort of stuff. So you've got the central group. The central group headhunts, uses its authority, as it were, to headhunt. Headhunt is a key concept, right? You're not getting anyone into positions of responsibility. You're going, Joe, he's quite a cool guy. I'm going to have a chat with him. Will you do this with me? Ask the person to do something specific, and then ask them to take on a role. Maybe they're going to be great at it, maybe they're not. This is totally different than self-selection. Self-selection is where people decide, more often than not, that because of some egotistical reasons, some, sociological sense of entitlement, they're white, middle class, university educated, they should be in charge. Well, 7 times out of 10, they shouldn't be in charge because they're not actually very good at being in charge because primarily they're quite egotistical. What you want is to be choosing people because they're competent and they're humble, right? They're in service. They're not asking to be given a position of authority. You're asking them to take on that authority. And so you develop these working groups around the central group, and in the last analysis they can be disbanded or the coordinator can be asked to step down. So there's some sort of protection discipline in the system, and at the same time there's a humanisation. They provide feedback, they go and sit in on part of the central group meeting, they do reports, they ask advice. There's continual interaction in a sort of living sociability sort of a way. Then there's an induction process. The induction process is compulsory. Anyone who wants to join the A22 project, they have to go to an hour, 2 hour, hardcore, this is what we're about. If you don't like it, no worries, you can go and set up your own project. But if you're in this, you have to entertain the notion of service, trust, integrity, accountability, statistical accountability, being a team player. I spoke about this in more detail in other episodes. And then, moving a little bit broader in terms of a cultural strategy, this notion of a structural approach to diversity. So, as I'm sure many of you watching this, know this sort of inclusive sort of diversity agenda is profoundly defective and self-contradictory because it doesn't actually take itself seriously. It degenerates into a sort of guilt-trippy, radical left, urban, rabbit hole, and at best it results in a rather embarrassing tokenism. Oh, there's a young person, let's get them onto the core group. Oh, there's a person of colour, let's ask them to be a speaker. What the A22 projects are doing at best, and there's a big challenge around this, I'm not pretending there isn't for a moment, is a structural approach to inclusion. In other words, like what we did between Insulate Britain and Just Stop Oil, was say, there's not many young people involved in Insulate Britain, so we're going to go to 20 universities, hand out 5,000 leaflets, have 50 meetings, follow-up meetings, and we're going to structurally engage with young people. So we can get 100, 200, 300 young people into Just Stop Oil, and then we're going to mentor them, then we're going to put them into positions of running action groups, and we're going to train them to go and speak on the media. So within 3 months, we had this massive success that we went from an organisation which was primarily run by older people to an organisation run primarily with young people. So in my view, this can be done with farmers, it can be done with ethnic groups, people of colour, and it's a completely different way of approaching, again, building a big civil resistance coalition, as you might say. And then another cultural deepening is, particularly in this ever-increasing context of repression, which is happening in the UK at the present moment, people being sent to prison for, saying climate change in court and such like, is a culture of care and attention given to people who are arrested, who go to prison, so that they feel part of this wider community of support. Now, what I've just outlined there in terms of this culture, there's probably people listening to this going, well, it doesn't work that well, Roger, which is obviously totally the case. But in terms of structural analysis, my proposition is the A22 network has, because of its organisational paradigm of going, we're going to actually think about this consistently and get stats and do training and all the rest of it, it's fundamentally different from this sludge and chaos of a sort of horizontalist orientation. All right, so I'm just going to finish this section, the first section of this, talking about A22, just to sort of burrow down into this micro detail about how you set up a civil resistance organisation in Western democracy. And as we'll come on to discuss in the second part, this model can be replicated for a social campaign, social justice campaign on homelessness or food poverty, or it can be this model can be used to create a campaign around, demanding a constitution, which is what I'm working on with one group at the moment. So it's worthwhile just attending to the next 10 minutes, because going from 0 people to 30 people is probably 60-70% of the challenge. Once you get to 30 people, it might sound mad, but once you get to 30 people, it's more or less like follow the recipe and you've got a good 50-50 chance of becoming, a major campaign in your country, if not the largest, most well-known climate or civil resistance campaign, which is quite a claim to make, isn't it? So how do you get from 0 to 30 people? So I should say at this moment that if you're watching this on YouTube, there's a longer video on this called, I think it's How You Change, How to Stop Climate Change in 6 months, I think it's called. So, that goes into quite a lot of detail about it as well. Though that was made about a year ago. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an update on the basis of quite a lot of setting up of about 10, 15 groups over the last year. So what's interesting here is who do you get? This is a big question. Who actually do you recruit to be on your, supposedly great dynamic group of 6? This is the biggest problem out of the big problem of getting to 30 people. So sometimes this works through, people have heard about an A22 project in another country, or they've, seen one of my videos. Maybe there's someone watching this video or this podcast and they're going, hey, we could do this in my country, So they get in touch, and the A22 network has a little bureaucracy. I'll be talking about this more in the next talk. And you have a meeting. And in that meeting, there's 3 outcomes. It's like we go, no, this person's just not going to be able to get it together. Or, this is cool, let's pursue the scenario. Or, this is really great, we're on the go. This person brings 4 people with them. They're serious, they're conscientious, they're polite, they're passionate, they want to learn. Okay, let's do it, Now, there's this irreducible, concept of chemistry, and, I'm not pretending I've got to the bottom of this one by any means, but some groups looks great and then they fall apart. And other groups look a little bit tricky and then they come through. You never quite know. So there's an irreducible 50-50 chance the whole thing, falls apart in the first 4 weeks. But to the extent that it doesn't, it helps to follow these next few points. So the first thing is it's good to have an open meeting with A22 network testimonies. So you go to country X and you've got your 6 people, or maybe you haven't got any people, but you've got some contacts in that country. And you have an open meeting and you say, look, we're coming to country X and we want to set up an A22 project. This is how it works. Don't take it from us. Here's some testimonies. So you have testimony for 10 minutes from people from Germany, testimony for 10 minutes from people from France, Switzerland, and people listening to it are going, oh my God, this is real. It happens in lots of different countries, and these people know what they're doing and they're being successful. So it has a massive empowering effect, and it has a massive community building effect, because you think, oh, I'm not alone here. It's not like I'm reading, it's not like I'm reading a book and then I'm all on my own. Just watching a video from Roger Hallam or something. You're part of this community of learning, right? A community of support. Okay, so you've got your open meeting, you've got your group together. it might look really good, it might look a bit scary, it might all fall to bits, but let's assume it gets itself together. One of the reasons it's going to get itself together is you're going to do this rapid induction method of this group. In other words, that group is going to be met with every week. Now, as it happens, I've just done this experiment, which is even more intensive, which is 2 1-hour meetings a week with 3 people in the room, myself and 2 A22 assistants, as it were, and we go bang, 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 bang through this list of things that people have to do. And as it happens, it's worked really well. So that's the level of what you might call micromanagement. It's not like, hey guys, here's a bunch of principles, let us know if you've got any problems, we'll check in with you next month. It's more like, go and do a 1-pager on your strategy. We needed that done by Friday. We're going to look at it, we're going to comment on it, and if we make recommendations, other things being equal, you're going to take those recommendations on, and there's going to be like 6 or 7 projects, what your induction process is, what your timeline is, how you're going to raise the money, what your demands are. There's a whole bunch of checklist. There's basically a checklist. And then through that process, you're continually reminding people about the ethos, that this is a supportive group, that each of you have to love each other and forgive each other and not be harsh, because it's difficult and we're all humans and we're learning and people make mistakes. It's a service orientation, it's a trust-based group. We're here to trust each other. Maybe Joe's going to get it wrong. We're going to have to trust him, because if we don't, you can't achieve anything unless you are able to give that sort of risk, as you might say. Then it's statistical. People are collecting their stats, they're reporting back, they're accountable. They're not going to be shamed. They're just going to be helped if, something hasn't quite happened properly. They give tasks back if they've got too much going on. And such like. So then through this process, they're going to create their mobilisation plan, right? They're going to decide on the 4 elements, what the name is, they've got their group, they've got their aim, they've got their civil disobedience project, and they're going to do their mass mobilising. And they've got their checklist, and they're going through all this, and they're helped every week, and they're doing statistical feedback. Then they get seed funding. So this is really important. A critical reason why A22 projects are successful is they get money really quickly, but they don't get a lot. They get like $5,000, $10,000, enough basically to pay for the banners, all the paraphernalia you need. If you're just a small group, unless someone's got loads of money, it's a real pain, because as many people know watching this, no doubt, or listening to it, if you've got no money, it's just everything takes loads longer, because you're trying to scrape together that $50 or that $100 to do things. So it's gloriously fantastic if you've got an international network that will just throw you $5,000, without you having any real objective credibility, because they believe in you, because you're following this methodology. So there's a gamification element here, which is, and by gamification, it's just a posh word for, if you do this, we'll give you this money. If you do this, then we give you more money. And if you do this, you'll get even more money. Which all sounds a little bit capitalistic, and in a sense it is. And the reason why we do it is because it works. Okay? So it's not done in some sort of nasty, we'll break your legs if you don't get to the next stage sort of situation. It's, it's a supportive thing, but it's real. Okay? If you don't get your shit together, then why should anyone give you money, right? Maybe you can give it to another group, in another country, because, this stuff doesn't grow on trees, as they say, and this energy can be given to another group. So if you want to get the money, then you need to follow the methodology. And that involves providing real-time stats, which, is very difficult because a lot of people don't like providing stats. So it's a bit of a battle, but it's something that's an ongoing process of cultural change in the activist community in the Western world. Is if you want to actually organise thousands of people, you need statistical feedback, because you need to know what's going on. You need to be able to allocate resources. You need to, get involved in something if it's all falling apart. To find out whether it's falling apart, you need the stats. Something's working really well, you need to know the stats, and then you can say, wow, those guys are doing really well, get the rest of the system to follow them. And then you've got the cultural transmission process, you know, picking out the leadership, the leader characters, the charismatic people, getting them to do the induction sessions, you know, give them, you know, show them how to do pep talks, get them to do, you know, your first 20 talks around the country and such like. Okay, so broadly speaking, you can see, hopefully you can see, this is detailed stuff, okay? And I'm not going to, you know, spend another 2 hours going into it. If you're watching this and you're going, wow, this sounds exciting, because it is, then you can contact me. You know, I've got a website where you can look up A22, you just email them, there's no pressure, you can have an exploratory chat. You know, it might be a project in a country which has already got a project in, that's no problem. And then other things being equal, you will get put on this process, and we'll see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there, because in the next part I'm going to go on to the broader design of A22 and the international aspects to it and the broader political aspects to it. And yeah, all good. Thanks very much.